Welcome to Dr. B Music Theory. Before we get started for this tutorial video, I'd like to ask you all to do me a favor. I've been involved with a sabbatical, meaning I have a year off from teaching at the college I normally teach at to do research and put on performances for my sabbatical project, Music of the Gilded Age in the Hudson Valley. Now, I've got another YouTube channel that's dedicated just to that. I've got a couple short video trailers and teasers. I'm making some documentaries. You all could do me a real great favor by going to that page and subscribing. I don't get to make a custom URL until I have enough people who've subscribed. So hopefully if you're interested in how I personally apply all this music theory knowledge, because I'm making arrangements for this project and I'm performing and I'm using that information to help inform my performance. If you're interested in seeing that, please follow along. I'd love to have you. But even if you're not interested and you just want to do the music theory for yourself, do me a favor, just subscribe anyways, so that I can get enough subscribers so that I can get that custom URL. That would be really awesome. So what we're going to talk about today is going to be lesson 49, and this is a video that I'm making exclusively for my Patreon supporters. Now what I'm going to do for everyone is share the first part of this video that gives you the basics, but then I'm going to go into further depth with more examples, and that's going to be available just on Patreon. So if you're interested in getting more of this great information, and I'm putting up homework examples and things that you can kind of like test yourself on, please support me on Patreon. It helps me make the time so I can make these awesome videos and share them with all of you. So, lesson 49, here we go. We're talking beyond the basics. That's what I'm calling it, because everything up till now, lesson 1 through 48, is all pretty standard, traditional, tonal harmony. And that's like a key word. I want you to, tonal harmony. This is what we're talking about. So harmony is really the study of how pitches interact simultaneously. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking harmony, simultaneously sounded pitches and those relationships. And then the tonal aspect is how those simultaneously sounded pitches relate as one group to another group, to another group, into an overall larger picture. So we've covered the basics, so harmonic progression, voice leading, non-chord tones, modulation, some of the more basic chromatic harmonies like augmented sixth chords, Neapolitan, secondary functions. We've covered all of that. But the beauty of tonal harmony is that it's almost limitless what is possible. Now, at certain points in history, people have thought otherwise. People would get to hear what Richard Wagner was doing with the chromaticism that he was using and say to themselves, there's nothing more that can be done. And before him, Beethoven made such a huge impact that people were really hesitant to write music, especially symphonies, because they thought Beethoven had kind of done it all and they didn't want to be compared as insufficient in terms of their innovation and what they brought to the table. But people wrote symphonies after Beethoven that were amazing. So it was possible. And people wrote harmonically after Wagner, and it was amazing. So people like Debussy came up with another kind of approach to harmony, and it's essentially tonal in its context. So there's still opportunities. If we listen to popular music, we're hearing use of harmonies in essentially tonal settings that are still a little bit different than what's come before. So there's still room for more innovation. It's a really rich palette to experiment with. So let's talk about one element that could be different. We're talking about the 5 or the 5/7 chord, so in other words, the dominant. And with the 6th of the chord we're referring to, so 6th of the chord substituted for the 5th of the chord. Now we know that the 5th is the easiest tone to leave out or omit. So this happens a lot in tonal music, where we might have root, root, root third, 3 roots and a third, especially at cadences. This is not uncommon, and if we're writing in three-part harmony, you can still leave that fifth out. Why can you leave the fifth out? This I've covered in previous lessons, but let me just summarize. The fifth is implied. The human ear almost basically supplies it on its own because of the way the overtone series works. The fifth is the first new pitch in the overtone series other than the fundamental. So because it's so basic in the way sound works, our ear naturally assumes a perfect fifth. So leaving it out, something that we have a lot of experience with already. So what we do is we leave out the fifth in a 5 chord and instead put in the 6. And this could be for a dominant 5 major triad or major minor 7 chord. Now, how do we do it to make sure it sounds good? There are a few more guidelines and rules that we can gather when we look at the literature. People like Haydn did this, people like Robert Schumann did this, and we're going to look at some of those examples to see exactly how. Let's go over the basics. First off, it must be in root position. That's what the literature shows us. Having that in root position. And why? Because that's what we want, right? That implication of the fifth. If we have this fundamental, a C, the next overtone is a C in an octave, and after that is the fifth. So if we don't have it in root position, we don't get that implied fifth. So I think that is probably the primary reason why we find this type of 5 chord used in root position only. The next thing is to talk about how we get in, how we prepare and resolve that. And to do that, I'd like to first take a look at these examples here at the bottom. So, in our first example, let's just first listen and then analyze. We have all right, so that sounds very much like we are in F major. So we indicate that with an uppercase F colon. We indicate our key signature. Our first chord is a 2 chord in first inversion. And again, I always recommend, if you want to get a little bit more practice, pause the video, try to analyze this before I do, and then just restart to see if you got it correct. So 2-6, which is, we have essentially a G minor triad with B flat in the bass. Going to a C major triad, which is our 5 chord. Going to a 1 chord. And in this case, we have root, 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 third, like I was just talking about, tripled root and a third. Very common for voice leading, smooth voice leading. Sounds great. Our ears hearing that implied fifth. Now, as we analyze this, it definitely isn't doing our beyond the basics. This is our kind of like our step 1 to show you how we get there. So 2-6, 5-1. We've heard this before. Hopefully we all understand it, how it works. Let's hear it again. Let's move on to our next example, which starts off the same. And we'll analyze this. We start with the 2-6 chord again. We go to a 5 chord, but here we have this A. And this A is not in our 5 chord. Our 5 chord typically, our C major triad, is going to be C, E, G. The A is not there. So we say our first instinct, based on non-chord tones, would be to analyze it as such. We say it's approached by a step and resolved by a leap in the opposite direction. That is an escape tone. So ET for short. And then we end with the exact same 1 chord as we had in our previous example. So here we see that the 5th of the 5 chord steps up into the 6th of the 5 chord and then resolves down by leap to the tonic, the root of our 1 chord. Now this is the critical thing to understand. So I'm going to say that part again. The 5th of our 5 chord steps up into the 6th of the 5 chord, and the 6 is not part of the chord, right? So the 6th member of that would apply there, and then resolves down by a leap of a third to the root of the 1 chord. So when we look at our final measure, we analyze this, here, 2/6 chord, as expected, same, 1 chord at the end, but here, instead of, we go to C, C, E, A. Now, before this lesson, you might have had a hard time trying to analyze and figure out what that was. So you're looking at a piece of music, you're listening to a symphony, you get to this and you're like, huh, how would I analyze this? Do you really say, well, I got a C? Let's make a little space right here. You say, okay, well, I've got a C, another C, an E, and an A. Well, I need to make that into a triad, so that A is the root, A, C, E, A minor triad, in first inversion. Therefore, A minor is the 3 chord, so it's a 3 chord in first inversion. And you might write 2/6, 3/6, 1. Now, friends, harmonic progression. This makes no sense in terms of our harmonic progression. We know that 2 does not go to a 3 chord. We also know that 3 is almost never found in first inversion. The only thing that you might say to me is, Dr. B, but you did say something about parallel first inversion triads. True. But we still, when you see something like this, you should definitely take a moment and think about, are there other options? And this is why we're talking about beyond the basics right now. If you listen to that root movement, it sounds like 2/6, 5/1, which is one of the reasons I also say to always use your ear and listen. Right? Don't fall into the trap of going so far into the music theory to think that the theory comes before the ears. It's the other way around. We use our ears, we listen, we discover what sounds good, what works for the way we hear things and the way sound works. We discover that, and then we look at it and try to say, well, what's the theory behind this? What's the principles, so that we can be a little quicker in figuring out what works and apply it across other examples, other pieces that we might be working with. So this is not a 3/6 chord. It looks like an A minor triad with C in the bass. We could spell it that way. You wouldn't be crazy, but you would be wrong. So what we really have is a 5 chord. And we really would just say C major triad. But we know that we're substituting the 6 for the 5th. And we would analyze that. There's one of two ways. One is to simply say that it is just a 5 chord with a non-standard escape tone. Non-standard escape tone. That's why this second example here was important. So here, we have that same shape of step up, leap down. And that just becomes non-standard because the preparation for the non-chord tone happens in the chord beforehand, and the entire duration of the 5 chord is all the non-chord tone. So you really could consider that a non-chord tone. I guess you could circle it and call it an escape tone. You could say ET, like that, and label it as such. So just a 5 chord with a non-standard escape tone. Another way that some music theoreticians analyze it is they say 5, and then they write it as substitution 6th. So 5 subs, S-U-B-S, 6. And there, if you were to do it that way, you wouldn't also analyze it as escape tone. It would be one or the other. So either 5 subs 6, meaning 5 substitute the 6, or 5 chord, circle it, label it as an escape tone, recognizing that it is a non-standard escape tone. All right? So that's essentially what it is. It's not super hard or super crazy, but let's make a couple observations here. This happens in the soprano, in the melody, and it's the only place it happens. It happens up higher, above the rest of the chord, and there's some reasons for that. But melodically, we go from scale degree 2, again, we're in F major, so the G is scale degree 2. We step up to scale degree 3 in our 5 chord, in our dominant, where we're making this substitution, and then we leap down to scale degree 1. And that's what needs to happen, all right? This again, this is the point where we're getting that substitution on scale degree 3, but this is the way we prepare it, and this is the way we resolve it. And it occurs in the upper part, the most upper part, in the melody or the soprano. All right, now that deals with triads, but let's take a closer look at what happens when we deal with a 5/7 chord. Okay, so here, let's make our analysis. We're now 2 flats. We're ending on a B flat major triad. I'm going to call this B flat major. E flat, G, C, that's a C minor triad with E flat in the bass. That is a 2 chord in first inversion. F, E flat, A, D. Well, let's see, let me think about that, right? Let's take a look, let's write it out. We got F, E flat, A, D. Well, we can't stack that into a triad, right? We got we have too many seconds in this, right? So D, E flat, F, that's a second. We don't have any chords that do that. So this is, at first you might say, well, this is not a tertial harmony. Well, we are okay. It is doing the topic we were discussing. We're substituting the 6th for the 5th. And that's where it's occurring, right there in the soprano part, as expected. So we can say, well, F, E flat, A, that looks like a 5/7 chord, right? And omitting the 5th, that happens. So we can easily call this 5/7, and we know it's going to go to 1. Right here, or actually we don't know that, but in this case it does. So it's a B flat, D, F, B flat, that's a B flat major triad. This is our F7. And we've just simply substituted the 6th for the 5th. Normally the chord would be F, A, C, E flat. But instead of that C, we're putting in a D. And it gives it a nice, unique color. Let's listen. Let's listen. So you use our ears. And it does sound like, if we're in a key of B flat, right? It does sound like 2 chord to a 5 chord. But we get this really, this sounds so pretty. It's such a, like it feels like things are lifting, right? Again, when we're talking about all this music theory stuff, it's to achieve a certain emotion in our listener. So as arrangers, as performers, we want to be in touch with our emotions. We want to be able to feel what it is so that we have a better chance of communicating that to our audience. So when I hear that, it feels optimistic. It feels upward. There's this upward feeling because it feels like it's floating above and it's going to come right back down and land somewhere nice. And it does when we go to that 1 chord. It's just it's a nice way. If we were to not do that, let's compare, right? That would be a regular 5/7 chord without this 6 substituted for the 5th. Let me do it again. Here's without the substitution. What does that feel like? It feels directed. It feels like we're bum, bum. It feels like it's moving more forward. It's more focused. Maybe a sense of determination. Those are the kinds of feelings that surround that. And we compare that to lightens it. It's almost like it's like eating a souffle as opposed to something heartier. It's light. It has some air in it. It has that sense of rising. So when we analyze this example, we can call it 5/7 and label that an escape tone. Or we can do the same thing where we say substitution. So we will write 5/7 and then next to it subs 6th. All right. Now, this last little part that I have written out already is to show you why this has to be in the soprano melody. Why it's so important. And let's use our ears to tell us why. Let's listen to this example right here. We're going to go. Right? And if you were to analyze it otherwise, it would be the exact same thing as what we just did. 2/6, 5/7, subs 6, 2/1. But it does not sound anywhere near as good. Let's compare them. I'll play first the correct way. Here's the correct way. And it's correct because the substitute 6 is in the soprano voice. Now let me play it the wrong way. And here it is, right? It's that D with the E flat. So the way you voice it, where they're distributed in the octave, makes a difference. And in this case, the 7th of the chord has to be below that substituted 6. When you have it like this is a minor second or a compound minor second. That is the most dissonant interval in music. This interval. Right there, that is a really dissonant interval. Compared to if the 7th of the chord, in this case the E flat, so if the E flat is below that, right, so let's say D to E flat, that is minor second, compound minor second, or minor ninth, we could say it, versus E flat to D, which would be a major 7. So this versus this. Let's listen carefully. Here's the minor second, compound minor second. Here's the major 7. I'm going to put a C here to represent it. I don't know if you can hear it because it's close, but this one is more dissonant. It is. Why is that? Well, because at least with the major 7, your ear can fill in some thirds. It can arrive to that note through tertial harmony with 2 missing steps, right? E flat, missing step G, D flat. So by 2 steps. Whereas with the D, if you want to get to the E flat, that would be a major minor 7 with a flat 9, which is something that we will be talking about in a future lesson. But that's 3 steps away in terms of putting in voices. So versus 2 steps to fill in, 3 steps, and that minor ninth is actually something that's more dissonant. It's not a regular ninth. It's not like a ninth from the key, right? So that would be a flat 9 outside of the key. Whereas when you're talking about a major 7, it's within the key. Let me show that. So if we were in D, it would be D, F sharp, A, C sharp, and then E. E would be our note. So we're already going outside of what that we would expect there by making it an E flat. Whereas with E flat, we're going E flat, G, B flat, D. It's within our major scale starting on that note. So you can see all the different reasons why that compound minor ninth, compound minor second, or minor ninth, would be more dissonant. So when you invert that and you don't follow this rule number 3 here, it creates just such an untenable dissonance. It just doesn't work anymore. Okay? So, with that, let's make clear a little space here to rewrite a few things and talk about that 5/7 just a little bit more. Okay? And as quick review, we're analyzing this as the 5/7 substitution of the 6, right? And we talked about why you need to have that 6 above the 7th. We talked about that. But now I would like to talk about how is this different than a 5 chord, a 13th chord. And this is something you'd find a lot in jazz music, and something that you do find in before jazz as well. But if any of you out there are jazz players and you look at this chord right here and you listen to it, you might say, "Oh, look, it's a 13th chord." Now, some music theory texts argue that these are not the same, and some people argue that they are the same. So let's look at the debate. Let's break down the debate, right? So if we keep in our key of B flat, a 5/7 sub 6 would be F, A. We are taking that C, we're moving it to a D, and then we have the E flat. A 13th chord, and this is a little bit premature, and I apologize because I know I haven't really talked about 13th chords, but you would say F, A, C, E flat, G, B flat, D. And let me rewrite that so it's a little bit easier to read. I'm going to put that right there. This is our 5/13. F, A, C, E flat, G, B flat, D. So this would be root, 3rd, 5th, 7th, 9th, 11th, 13th. Okay, so that's technically what you would have, right? So that's a 5/13 chord versus, right? So I can't just go, so I can't put that D down here. I substitute the D for the C, but I then put it up above the E flat, right? So versus, so what's the difference? Well, the difference between these, and I'll make it even easier to compare and contrast. F, A, E flat, D. So our difference is the 5/7 sub 6 is missing this. Has the same structure as the 5 dominant chord with a 13th upper structure, but it's missing some of those inner pieces. So some music theory texts will say it's a different chord entirely. You can't call it a 13th chord because it's missing too many of the other chord members. But jazz musicians will say, well, normally on a 5/13 chord, you're not playing all those members of the chord anyways. You wouldn't normally play them all. You certainly wouldn't normally be playing the 11th. If anything, you'd be playing a sharp 11 and make it a B natural. And chances are you wouldn't be, it would be normal to leave some of those out. So a jazz chord might be something like, you might have something, you might have the 9th in there, but you wouldn't have necessarily the 5th or the 11th. And in jazz, you sometimes do hear things like just just as a 3-note hand structure. So the jazz musicians might argue with that. Me personally, I think the jazz musicians got it right this time. I think that essentially 5/7 substitution of the 6, you're essentially talking about an upper structure, the way it's voiced. Now there might be some subtle differences that I haven't quite considered, so I concede that there might be more to it. But I think at this level, there's, just being aware that, okay, yeah, a 13th chord doesn't necessarily have to have all its chord members in it to still be a 13th chord. And I guess we will revisit this when I go do an in-depth discussion on upper structures, which will be coming up soon. Before we finish up, I want to give you one more example, because we've dealt with major keys up till now. But what about minor keys? Well, all the rules are exactly the same. And we can see this in the music of Robert Schumann. So let's take a look. This is the opening of one of his pieces. I'm going to play it for you very, very slowly. What I think is particularly, as you look at that and now try to analyze it. So again, pause the video on the score, try to analyze it, and see if you can find where we have this 5-chord substitution of the 6. And once you're done, start up the video. Here we go. I'm going to now analyze it as we go and as I play it. So in the very first measure, we have a rest on beat 1 for the left-hand chords, which you'll notice is in treble clef. So we don't worry about that. If we have that chord there, we backphrase, we assume it starts on beat 1. So we would just label 1 chord on that first beat, even though we don't get the full chord till there. We would label this as a 5/6 chord. And then we go to 1, 4/6, 5. Now here's a little bit tricky, because you might say, oh look, F-A, it's got to be a 3 chord, omitting the 5th, because there's only 2 notes to work with. But 5 does not go to 3. Harmonic progression is more important. Our ears hear that more importantly. We expect 5 to go either to 1 chord most strongly, and then maybe deceptively to 6. With little information, this is definitely closer to a 1 chord than a 6 chord. So we're going to call it 1/6, even though the root's not there. It's a little bit minimal here. So we'll call that 1, 7 diminished 6, 5/7, 6, 4, 4/6, 5. Then we have a repeat, 1 chord, 5/6. I'm sorry. Then 1, 4/6, 5, 1/6 with the root omitted, but we're in this key of D minor. We've heard it so clearly heard before. We've heard our D in the melody. We've had the chords. It's been very basic chord progression. Our ear will supply that D and make sense of this. 5/6, 5/7, 6, 2 half diminished 6/5. Here's our 5 chord with the substitution of the 6 for the 5th. And that happens right in the melody where we would expect it. And then it resolves to 1 as expected. So let's just have that last measure, because that's what we're covering with this video. Let's compare that to what it would sound like if we just kept the E and had a regular traditional 5 chord. Instead we had, let's say, but we don't. Schumann's a little bit more interesting than that. He wanted to mix it up. How does that change it emotionally? I think when you have that, it's very different in minor emotionally. It has a more of a, it still feels like it's moving up, but it's got this greater tension to it because of the interval being a minor 6 instead of a major 6. It's almost like a yearning quality as opposed to a floating optimistic. It's more yearning in the minor modality. So those are some great examples. And before this, I tried to show you how you could look at it and come up with the wrong chord and think that Roman numeral wise it's a different function. But if you use your ears and you have this knowledge that you now have, you can make better sense of some of this music. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video, subscribe if you haven't subscribed to my Music of the Gilded Age. And if you want to get more stuff, more theory, more new videos like this, complete videos, make sure you're subscribed to Patreon.